Will Gano, welcome to Acquiring Minds.
Will, thanks for having me.
Will, I want to congratulate you on buying a business. This was a long-term plan of yours, really the realization of a goal 10 years in the making. You did it, and we're excited to hear the story. Start us off, Will, with some background on you, please.
Sure. Okay, so first off, I'm sitting in Chicago, originally from New Jersey. I got turned on to ETA through business school program 10 years ago at Chicago Booth. I started my career before going to business school in finance, and I quickly realized after 3 years of that it wasn't the career path for me. And I wanted to change direction, so I went to business school and found what I was passionate about.
Mm-hmm. And so 10 years ago, 2014, ETA, entrepreneurship through acquisition, wouldn't have been as mature then. What was your exposure to it at business school?
Sure. So I think I missed the formal Booth programming by about a year. I was in the Booth Entrepreneurship Through Acquisition Club. We had 20 members that would meet irregularly, informally, a couple speakers here and there. But in terms of having a fully built out program, it wasn't there. Despite that, it was still incredibly compelling to hear about.
What did you tell us what you liked so much about it? It's probably what turns us all on, but I always like to hear the guests put it in their own words. Why did it grab you?
Well, it was one of these love at first sights or first hearing things where, you go to college or university and you come out and you're looking for jobs. You know all about the big companies, and it feels almost like you get on the conveyor belt a little bit. You get siloed, and in a small business, you wear so many hats. You can take such a high leadership role at a relatively earlier stage in your career. You can have a lot more autonomy, especially if you're the owner. And I just, for whatever reason, hadn't really thought about it or been exposed to it until then. And when I learned about it, I said, wow, this is exactly what I'm getting an MBA for, this wide-ranging business skill set. And this seems like the perfect way to apply it and the perfect way to build the life that I'd want to build for me and my family.
Fantastic. Now, you didn't graduate from business school and immediately go do it. So despite how compelled you were by it, what did you choose to do in the interim or instead?
Yeah. So I was trying to be realistic, saying, okay, I've got, a handful of years of financial services experience. I am, drawn more towards, acquiring something in the space that's not, financial services related. What do I know about operating a business, and how would I, with a straight face, go lead an organization with a bunch of people who rely on me, maybe take capital from people who are counting on me to return on their investment without experience. So I looked for a job where I could get that experience, specifically in the fields that I was looking to acquire in, which would be manufacturing or distribution.
So the plan is starting to take shape. You're going to buy a business at some point, and even which industries turn you on, manufacturing or distribution. And so you target your job search in those. Where do you land?
Yeah, so I landed at an amazing company called Cargill. It's the largest family-owned company by revenue, I think, in the world, definitely in the United States. And what turned me on about that was just the wide range of businesses that they owned and that I could operate in addition to starting out in their strategy and business development group, where I could get M&A experience and also strategic thinking experience. So it was basically what I considered an extension of the MBA learning type program that I was already in at Booth, but I could get paid to do it and work with amazing people on amazing problems.
Mm-hmm. And for those who don't know Cargill, give us an example of what it produces.
Sure. So Cargill revenue is around $150 billion, and almost depending on your diet, you probably ate something already today that Cargill touched in some form or fashion. So some of the bigger businesses are the grain business. So they're one of the main grain houses. They're also one of the largest meat processors, one of the largest food ingredient makers. So they don't have brands per se in the U.S., but they're making ingredients that go into pretty much anything that you're eating that is processed.
So they're not a CPG company; they're a B2B company providing
the biggest customers are CPG companies like Nestle and Unilever, and name a CPG company that would be the biggest customers of Cargill.
Great. And by the way, why did you like manufacturing and or distribution as where you were going to spend your career by business?
Yeah, so I think figuring out what you like is a function of figuring out what you don't like. And I had a great job in finance, but a lot of responsibility at a young age at a really great firm. But I couldn't grab on to in my brain maybe the lack of tangibility of what I was doing all day. So moving fixed income products around and buying and selling and helping people buy and sell those didn't seem as tangible to me as something physical that I could see, touch, feel, eat. In the case of a food business.
You're in Cargill. Does it give you the education that you want? Do you end up learning the things that you want? Give us a minute on your experience there and how long you were there.
Sure. So I ended up staying at Cargill for close to 10 years. And in terms of the education experience, yes, that and more. I mean, I was initially thinking, okay, this will be a handful of years, roll out and look for a business. And it turned into more than that because the people I was working with were great. The businesses were incredibly interesting. So I got to work on things from, dry bulk shipping. So those massive, 50,000 ton ships trading those around the world, to cocoa bean processing, to, metal forming and cutting businesses, to, seafood protein, to you name it. So there, it's a massive company with a lot of things for people to do and a lot of experiences to gather. So I felt like I was, continuing to learn things. And I would have if I stayed today, just because of the breadth of the portfolio of their businesses.
And so what was it that finally prompted you to start to seriously consider kicking off your search?
Yeah. So I felt like I had, personally gotten enough, experience, built up my skill set to be dangerous. So that was one thing. I felt that probably, around 5 to 7 years in, but then I say, okay, well, one of the reasons I want to buy a business is because I want it to work for the life that I'm trying to build for my family. It's not just, the financial return or whatnot. It's, where do we want to live? What type of, business does it need to be to, be around my kids and spend more time with my wife? And so until I knew where we wanted to live, it was hard for me to do a geographically focused search. With Cargill, I was based in Minneapolis. We had a lot of ties back in Chicago, where I'd moved after college and met my wife. And really what pushed us to, me to really go, hard on the search was COVID, figuring out, hey, we've got a lot more family in, nearby Chicago. Let's move back there, given what's going on in the world during COVID. So we made that decision in, 2020. And I had been poking around, talking to brokers and whatnot in Minneapolis. But when we decided, okay, we're going to build our life for the long term in Chicago, Cargill was gracious enough to let me move and be a remote employee. But that's when I decided, okay, now let's get really into the broker network in Chicago. Let's see how we can make it work on a more accelerated timeline.
And so tell us what shape your search took.
Sure. So it, a lot of self-education over the years, listening to podcasts, listening to buy then or reading buy then build, and all the usual search material. I I felt like reading Search Funder and whatnot. There's good learnings from other people. So standing on other people's shoulders, what works, what doesn't work. I started out thinking, okay, well, I've got a full-time job. I'm not trying to leave my job to do this full-time because I'm the only income earner in our house right now. And we've got, at that time, 2 children. So how do I do this in a way that's most efficient? So what does that mean? Looking for already activated sellers, specifically through brokers. So trying to ingratiate myself with the Chicago network of brokers, of which there are, well over 100.
And so it was a broker outreach while staying at Cargill. So a part-time search, effectively.
It was a part-time search. I mean, I felt like I was doing 2 full-time jobs, right? Because it's, doing that network and outreach, and following up on, publicly posted listings or things that I would, get sent based on, the relationship I had with the broker. Trying to fit all that in while doing my usual, call it 8 to 5 job in, hours after work or whenever. It's a lot.
Yeah. And did you find what I hear so many guests say when they do a kind of broker outreach to their local market, that it very quickly 80-20'd, that while 100 is a lot of brokers, in fact, it's a small handful, even in a big city like Chicago, that are really doing a lot of business?
Oh, for sure. I mean, you learn pretty quickly what types of businesses certain brokers specialize in and what fits what you're looking for. You learn that there's a lot of, onesie twosie brokers who can make a great living selling 1 or 2 businesses a year. And that, the numbers game, having a relationship with those type of brokers and hoping that their next business or 2 fits what you're looking for is, pretty low odds. So, what I found was there's, a handful of more regional broker groups that would have pretty solid, compelling listings. And that's who I gravitated more towards.
Tell us more about the search and how it progressed.
Sure. So, 2020 is, ticking down, had seller meetings and whatnot, sent out some indications of interest, sent out an LOI, didn't progress. 2021 rolls around and similar. I feel like my, deal flow isn't so stellar that I know I'm going to land something soon. So fall of 2021, I say to myself, okay, well, how can I turbocharge this in a way that it's not going to take me 10 years to find a business? So at that point, I engaged a buy-side firm to do a proprietary, semi-proprietary search on my behalf, in addition to the broker outreach I continued to do.
Tell us more about this. What did the agreement look like? What were they doing for you? What did it cost?
Fairly standard monthly retainer for the search, because these buy-side firms want to get paid on successful outcomes is where they make their money, but that's not guaranteed. So they need to charge a monthly retainer to do their outreach work and pay their people to do that. So I paid a monthly retainer. I upfront set the criteria of what we were looking for. So I set it to say, I'm looking in these zip codes, in these industries, with this revenue range. And that initial list returned 10,000 different potential companies, because I'm in Chicago, a pretty big metro area, a lot of companies. But when we got into it, we found, okay, well, these 10,000 companies, there's way fewer that are actually businesses that I'd want to buy and own, as a someone who wants to buy and scale and operate a business. A lot of these manufacturing business specifically were things like what I call job shops. So they get custom orders from companies to bend metal or cut metal in a certain way or weld it. That was, thousands of businesses. So you look at the list of 10,000 and what's actionable. It's 1 to 2,000 maybe, and then who's an activated seller? Like that's way lower than that. So the numbers game, even in a massive metro like Chicago, is really tough and stacked against you. So your question was, how is my agreement structured? So I paid a retainer for the months that they did outreach on my behalf, and then there was a success fee at the end. I did a flat success fee because I didn't want the, if real estate was rolled in or some other consideration, I didn't want the success fee that I had to pay to have any impact on the deal that I was going to do. So I knew up front what I was going to pay if I successfully acquired a business that the buy-side broker brought me.
And can you share what the retainer was, or what the end result was of price? I mean,
on price, I'd rather not, considering it's you can look up publicly what who I used. I can say my success fee was in the six figures, right? So it's not cheap. And then my retainer was in the thousands of dollars also. So this is not a free service by any means, but I would say in my case, considering I was successful at the end of the day, completely worth it right now.
In the thousands per month. So more than 1,000, less than 10,000 probably a month, but considerable.
Sure. Yes.
So all into this buy-side broker, though, also it was six figures.
Yes.
One of my guests from probably 2 years ago now, Jason Andrews, used a buy-side broker in Kansas City to buy business. And similarly said that it was quite expensive and that he'd do it all day long. He'd do it over again all day long. Because ultimately, he wanted a good business for a good price, and they brought him a good business for a good price. It worked out great for him, and it was very worth it. As much as your six-figure ultimate fee to these folks was, do you kind of have the same takeaway?
Yeah, I think so. I think when we get into my actual trajectory of how long it took to land a business, and there was some times in there where I thought maybe this paying all that retainer money wasn't worth it, because it took 2 years after I was initially introduced to the firm that I bought to close, and it wasn't a guaranteed thing that it was going to happen. Looking back, would I have bought this business without engaging the buy-side firm? No. So was it worth it? Definitely. But yeah, there's also an element of luck still. There's no certainty in any of this, right? Just because I engaged the firm to search on my behalf doesn't mean they guarantee that they're going to bring me something that is worth buying or that I can buy.
Right. And just putting ourselves in their shoes, you've already said this, but to put a fine point on it, this of course is why they're expensive, and there's a flat fee or a monthly fee because they are going to be doing a lot of work for you, and actually consummating a deal, stars have to align. And so I'm sure they recognize that. I'm sure they have a lot of clients where they don't ultimately buy something, and so they will give in hours to those clients, and can't just be expecting to get paid a success. Before we get more into the search, Will, these job shops that you disqualified, you had said that a certain size of business by revenue was one of your filters. So presumably these 8,000, call it, you said the universe of companies that came back on your list, your initial list was 10,000, but then you sliced off 8,000 or 9,000 of those. Presumably they were big enough. They were legit businesses. They weren't, a guy in his shop, because you had this revenue floor. So why did you not like job shops? Because I've had some guests on who bought them, and now I'm talking to folks who have been successful with the job shops they acquired. So obviously there are counterexamples, but why is it such a no for you?
Yeah, no, I think to the point, can they be great businesses for people to own? Yes. Can people roll them up? Yeah, I know people who are doing that to scale them in other ways. But for me,
Yeah.
I was looking for companies with products that could scale, and not more of project custom jobs. So I think it's type of revenue I was looking for was different, and I it goes back to what interests me too. It's not just the business model and the type of revenue. It's I like saying, okay, there's my product in the market that I had a hand in, and it wouldn't have happened if me or my company wasn't making it.
Thank you. Okay, so your broker outreach, you've engaged the buy-side broker, you're paying them a hefty monthly fee, but time continues to march on, and what? Tell us as these months tick by and that fee is starting to weigh heavy. What's the search looking like?
Sure. So I engaged the buy-side firm in November, or we started in November of 21. The agreement, and then 7 months later, I sit down with my broker rep, and he's basically like, I think you should stop searching. We've gone through the list, and if things come back around and our drip campaigns are successful in a few months, we'll pick it back up. But right now, we've picked things over. So save your money. So at this point, I'm like, this is getting into the early part of summer of 22, and I'm just feeling a little dejected, depressed. How long is this going to take? Should I keep? Yeah, it was incredibly discouraging, and I had a few conversations with people who were interested in search at the time, and I just knew how negative I was coming across as, but I was in the wasteland of, okay, 10,000 companies in Chicago that, fit my criteria of it was 2 to 20 million in revenue, in distribution and manufacturing. And there isn't one that, I'm, moving forward with. Like, what the heck? Like, how is this going to work? So, those were tough months there. And basically almost a tough year after that. I continued my own broker outreach and, going after listed deals. And I would say one of the things that was helpful about engaging the buy-side firm, even after my engagement ended, was, I was at the top of their list for new, businesses that they were bringing to market. And they have a great stable of businesses that they've got in the pipeline. So that was helpful because I had been paying them for all those months, and I got even more preferential treatments, beyond just building a relationship. So, because they knew I was an activated buyer and felt very comfortable putting me in front of sellers early.
Yeah. Yep. And you'd pay them a lot of money. But it sounds like they did right by you. I mean, for a service provider to go to their client and say, stop paying us, we can't in good conscience let you keep paying us because the service we're providing for you, we've done what we can. It's a stand up. Seems like a stand up thing to do.
They're best in class. I'll say.
Do you want to plug their name here, Will?
Yeah, Calder Capital, based in Grand Rapids, Michigan. They've built a great service on both the buy side and the sell side, and it's a flywheel, right? The more buy side engagements they get, the bigger their Rolodex is of businesses. So, thinking about, do you want to build a proprietary outreach engine from scratch by yourself, or do you want to pay up and already get a huge head start because they've built it already and they've got all the the contacts and they've got the marketing campaigns going and whatnot. So it's interesting consideration, even if you aren't thinking along the same lines as me, which is, hey, I've got a full-time job, I need someone to help me with this.
I wonder why more of my guests don't use buy-side brokers, buy-side firms. I mean, the answer is because they're expensive and it costs a lot of money up front.
It's really expensive.
Searchers are generally want to put every dollar toward their actual deal. There's going to be deal costs that are also hefty, as we all know. There's going to be broken deal costs. You're going to spend money on a deal that goes nowhere, that dies. So you got to really be preserve your capital. So I answered my own question there. But they do seem like you had a good experience. As I said, Jason Andrews had a really good experience. So
yeah, it's different also, Will, when you're, still working full-time job. Your runway is kind of infinite when,
yes,
if you're, burn the bridges and it's, you're all in on your search, hiring a buy-side firm just shortens your runway.
Exactly. No, great point. And both you and Jason were gainfully employed. So, you had a longer runway and you had money coming in. Okay, Will. So what happens next? When do we get to hear about this business that you ended up buying?
Sure. So I first was introduced to this business by Calder in March of 2022. The name of the business is Bear Stewart. It's a bakery ingredient manufacturer based in Chicago. And again, just like when I heard about ETA or when I met my wife, I was like, this is it. I immediately wrote an LOI, which I thought was at a compelling value, and sent it over within 3 days of being introduced to this company. And it was more like, okay, hold up here on their side. They had been for sale a number of years before in 2017, and they pulled back from the market, and they were thinking about re-engaging the market. So still had a investment banker engaged, and they sent me the SIM from 2017 and some updated financials for me to make my offer based on. But at the time, there was some turmoil with their customer base, specifically their largest customer that they were heavily concentrated on. So they didn't really want to be engaging at that moment in a sale process.
Back in 2017.
Back in 2022, when I first met them. In 2017, I think there was a couple partners that owned the business together, and I think there were some differing opinions about should they sell or shouldn't they sell.
Gotcha. Okay, sorry. And then in 2022, when you first engaged with them, they needed to pump the brakes because there was an issue with one of their largest customers, and we're going to return to that. I just one thing I want before we leave your search here, Will, to have you share with the audience is your approach to LOIs. So you, as I recall from our previous conversations, are of the mind, are on one end of the spectrum with respect to LOIs. Spectrum being send out lots of LOIs, kind of a see what sticks approach, versus other end of the spectrum where you sit, which is take the LOI seriously, submit them only on businesses that you actually would. I mean, most people aren't going to submit an LOI on a business they're totally not interested in, but really be kind of further down your own funnel in terms of being interested in a business before you submit an LOI, and put a lot of thought and detail into the LOI. So I'm sorry, I'm taking words out of your mouth. You should be telling us this.
Oh,
so go ahead.
You're way smoother than I am, so you keep talking. You nailed it. So I figured it was more like a marriage proposal than let's go meet coffee type thing. You're putting in the letter, I will pay you millions of dollars to buy your business. I think that's a pretty big deal. So over my 4 years of searching, I didn't send out more than 10 LOIs, and they were on businesses that I was serious about acquiring, and I thought my seriousness reflected in the willingness of the seller to engage with me. So these were not like I was sending out an LOI and then never going on a site visit or meeting the person or whatever. This was I've already gotten comfortable with wanting to own a business like this, and with the what I see in the SIM, and what I know about the seller. And I wanted to put my best foot forward to stand out in that way, because if these attractive businesses are getting half a dozen, 20 LOIs, then how do you stand out if you're not an earnest, sincere person?
And you've just articulated one of the maybe the biggest argument for approaching LOIs the way that you did, with each one quite seriously, versus the spray and pray. I don't think anyone goes that far where they just spray out LOIs, but the high volume approach to LOIs. And that is, when the seller or the seller's broker receives LOIs, they can really tell how serious the offer is, or how much thought has been put into the LOI. And in a competitive market like we increasingly find ourselves in, and particularly for an attractive business, obviously, the more serious the LOI, the more you're going to stand out as a potential buyer, and the more the broker or the seller are going to smile upon your offer. So that's a really good reason to spend time on an LOI. The flip side, I guess the counter argument to that is, kind of the numbers game argument. It's, you just gotta finally finding a business that you can buy. It's just going to take a lot of at bats, and so you got to increase your number of at bats, and therefore more LOIs. We could go back and forth on that debate. Ultimately, it probably also comes down to personal style, I think, of searcher. And you're a considered guy, Will. So I'm not surprised that you ended up on the end of the spectrum where you did.
Yeah, I think different strokes for different folks, right? It's not. I'm not saying my approach was the best. It took how long did it take me to buy a business, right? So there's different approaches that work better for people, and in different situations too. So it all there's so many different factors that go into it. I will say, if you're more considered on the front end and you have an accepted LOI, then you're way more willing to spend the money in a lot quicker fashion to diligence the business.
Yeah. Well, and that is something I definitely notice about your search, or you as a person, Will. Don't misunderstand your Will's taking his time with things as a fear to act, because when you find something, you move quickly and decisively. Yeah. So as you just explained with this business, I mean, it was love at first sight, and you were all over it, even though it took 5 years to find it. So in some ways, that kind of reminds me of Warren Buffett, the ability to be patient, the willingness to be patient and wait for the fat pitch. And when you see that fat pitch, you swing like crazy.
I've been waiting for 37 years for someone to compare me to Warren Buffett. So thank you, Will.
Well, there you go.
Oh man. Well, I would say there are downsides for my deliberate approach, right? So, after all these years of engaging the same brokers, people were like, okay, is this guy actually serious about buying a business?
Yes.
And, I was, how do you prove it after, you've talked to the same guy about his third deal over the last few years where, it doesn't move forward, or he's shown you a bunch of things and you say, it looks interesting. Okay. Tell me a bit more. Okay. That doesn't fit. So yeah, there's some brokers where, and they can have edges too. And I had a couple situations where, it was a little less than friendly.
Say more.
There's a couple specific times. I think the most, the best story to tell is around a broker who, I engaged early on in the process, and then he was a little wary about continuing to engage me over the years. And he showed me a business, before he put it on the market, and there was something fishy going on with the financials where the seller was savvy and really deflated their earnings in, call it 4 to 5 years ago, to pump them up in the last 3 years, knowing that the banks would only look at the last 3 years. They did that through manipulating inventory values, what it appeared to me looking at the financials. And I mentioned this to the broker, and he did not take it well. And he, basically said, I bet you $10,000 that I'll sell this business before you ever buy one. So
Ouch.
It was, yeah, I was like, "Oh, well, I don't know if they ever sold the business, so maybe I should have taken the bet."
Well, Will, when these brokers are being edgy, nasty, and basically telling you to your face that you're a tire kicker, and indeed you're spending money on a buy side broker, and your search is ticking on. Do you feel self doubt at any time? Maybe I am a tire kicker. Maybe I'm not going to do this thing.
I knew I was going to do it. I knew, and you know certain things about yourself. I knew I was going to get it done, but what gave me the doubt was, how long is it going to take? And my wife would be like, "Stop telling me about these. I don't want to hear about any more new businesses that you've come across. Like, tell me when it happens." And there, it's I've glorified a little bit doing the working full time when looking for a business, but it was hard because it's hard to do something really well when you're not fully committed. So if I knew eventually that I'm going to be buying a business, how does that translate to how I'm doing in my day-to-day job that people are paying me to do and trusting me to do well? So there is some self-doubt around, how am I juggling all these things, and how can I keep everybody happy and still get, the end result that I'm looking for. So, and you're in a corporate, and one of the goals in working at a corporation is to, continue to get new great experiences and move up the corporate ladder. And if you're not putting all your time and energy in that, then you're kind of, just treading water a little bit. And not that I wasn't, getting new great opportunities, but what if I was, all in, I'm not buying a business, I'm going to be, work at this company for the rest of my career. What would have been different?
Frustrating. But I'm sure many listeners can relate.
I was in search purgatory for a couple of years, and it wasn't fun.
Yeah, but you did coin a good phrase for that experience. Will, let's get back to the business. You said baking ingredients. Give us the bullet points on the business again, and pick us back up in the story that it came back on your radar on the market.
Sure. So I had mentioned that the business was represented by a banker, and I'd stayed in touch with the banker from that kind of March 2022 date onward, checking every few months, and he'd check in with me saying, they're going to come to market next quarter. And that was, a year and a half of that. So they didn't for a while. So I was assuming it wasn't going to happen. But anyway, the business highlights, to take the first part of your question, is the company's been around in name since 1899. The majority owner had bought the business in the 60s. We manufacture sweet bakery ingredients. So we make mixes like cake mixes. We make batters like muffin batters and brownie batters. We make frozen preformed cookies. We make fillings and icings and glazes that grocery stores will use in the back of the house and put out on the shelf, or wholesale bakers will incorporate into their products, or restaurants will use in their desserts or muffin breakfasts or whatnot.
Well, it sounds very similar to how you described Cargill, if 1,000th the size, but basically a B2B business where you're not selling these food products to the end consumer, but to they're ingredients that go into products that the end consumer buys, but your customer is making a food product with them. So it's a B2B business, correct?
Yeah, it's a pretty good analog to the businesses that I was operating in Cargill. So I felt very comfortable with it. And that's kind of, the love at first sight was, this is perfect. I get to buy, raw agricultural commodities, flour, sugar, cocoa, and make value-added products. I know how to do this.
Can you give us a sense of the size, numbers around a business?
Yeah. I'll hopefully give enough to give people an idea without, giving away trade secrets. So in terms of revenue, it's, the very low end of 8 figures. In terms of EBITDA margin, it's called in the tweens. So it
Okay.
was, in terms of the size range I was looking for, pretty perfect to on like the slightly higher end of what I wanted.
And so you submit your LOI in 3 days. It's a Will Gano special, carefully crafted, demonstrating how serious you are as a buyer. And what? They say yes?
No. So I wrote an LOI, but I also wrote a personal letter to the majority owner saying, hey, this is why I want to buy your business, and explained a lot of the things we just talked about, and explained how I would be as an owner, and put a lot of love and care into that. And this was spring of 22, and they say, okay, well, there's why don't we meet up and you can see the plants and all that, but there's some stuff going on with the customer base, so probably need to put any sale discussion on hold. And by the way, when we do sell, we're going to do a process. So go out and a couple months later meet for breakfast one day with the majority owner, who's, by the way, in his mid 80s, and then a few weeks after that do a site visit and get a feel for their locations. And that was summer of 22. I stay in touch with the banker, like I mentioned, and late 22 they say, okay, well, the dust has settled. I think we're going to go to market in the first quarter of 23. We'll send you financials. Don't get financials until like April of 2023 for full year 22, and they say, okay, well, we're going to look for IOIs in, I think, maybe May or June. Submit an IOI, move on. Okay, we're going to get LOIs end of August of 23. Okay, submit an LOI. They tell me I'm one of the two final LOIs they're considering, and then negotiate on that for a few weeks and signed the LOI on October 8th, 2023. And then I closed the business January 31st of 24. So we're talking almost 2 years from my first engagement with the company.
Wow. Okay. Well, some follow-ups there. Is the buy-side advisor Calder? Mm-hmm. Are they helping you with this process? I mean, the deal sourcing is kind of the big thing we think about them helping with. But once you're in the process and competing and submitting IOIs and LOIs, are they also helping you with that piece?
Yeah, it was more like a phone a friend type relationship with my broker. So Shane, my man over there, who's excellent. It wasn't like, hey, can you help me? Can you help me do this valuation or whatnot? It was, here's the problem that I'm running into. What do you think? And always had some sage advice for me. So what I negotiated up front with them was more of a, the prospecting, knowing that I had already done M&A work myself to be able to get through the deal process.
And just for the listener, do you think that they would offer actual deal
Definitely.
Navigation as a service as well if somebody needed that? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, definitely. No, I just was looking for the most economical way to do it for what I needed. So I said, I don't need the full white glove service after we source a deal. But I think I got it from there. But that's what they wanted to provide up front because that's what they know how to do.
Yeah. And what's Shane's last name? Just plug him if you thought he did a great job.
Yeah, Shane Kissack.
Shane Kissack. Okay. And one of the things, Will, from our earlier conversations too, that you said was and this is really key, maybe all of the, like so much of the value in working with them was here. They legitimized you and got you into this process. And as a lone searcher, you probably wouldn't have been let in because the seller, this business is large enough that they're working with a banker and they're not, entertaining just, acquisition entrepreneurs as part of the process. Say more about that.
Yeah. So this is crucial. Coming as Will Gano, trying to do my first deal buyer to a legit banker, why would they deal with me? They don't know anything about, the SBA 7A program. They deal with, mostly private equity funds and then some strategics that they can bring into the process. So I don't know for sure, but I would venture to guess that I was the only individual buyer in the process that they eventually ran to sell Bear Stewart. I don't think I would have gotten meetings with the seller in the first place because, it's a real legit business and real customer base, and they felt, okay, we should be attracting big deep pocketed buyers to this deal. Like I said, with the customer retention issue, the financial profile of the business changed, so the interest from financial buyers like private equity funds also changed during the years. So I got into the process and then I was well positioned and, very interested compared to, private equity funds who would have said, okay, well, this doesn't look great. The revenue is declining. Now the financial footprint of the business is maybe too small for us. But I'm sitting there as, maybe the only individual buyer in the process saying, this is great, bring it on. I can see the diamond in the rough in the revenue profile that, actually it's, if you take away this one, super concentrated customer, it's a pretty stable business.
Well, I'm going to want to hear more about that here in a second, that interesting strategic development of this opportunity, how losing a big customer was actually a positive for you in a few ways. First, though, so do you think, Will, that you won the business because these other parties were basically not interested, or they were not as interested and therefore submitting probably less appealing offers? I guess, rephrase, why did you win? How did you win, do you think?
I think I was willing to offer a fair price, but also I came to the table as, someone that's way more flexible than maybe a strategic buyer who would just look for the customer list and then not need the employees, or a financial buyer who was, maybe doing a roll up or something else that, would have affected the way the business operated. So I could give the buyer more of the intangibles that they were seeking. They 100% wanted everybody to stay employed at the business. That was, non-negotiable. And that's not, I needed everybody to stay employed. Right. So, I think just the type of buyer I was and, how that fit with what the seller wanted helped compared to, maybe some of the other people in the process. And then financially, I think it just weeded out some prior interested parties when the business's financial footprint was larger, and we'll get into that. But I think there was probably less competition over time, given that, and given I'd already spent 2 years getting to know the seller, so they could feel comfortable having an individual buyer in the process.
And you were just professionally, you were just such a good fit. I mean, 10 years at Cargill, kind of doing a lot of the same work that you'd be doing as owner of this business, right? Or am I overstating how that experience would map into your leadership of this business?
I don't think that I'm God's gift to food manufacturing, but I did learn enough in 10 years to be dangerous and to know what levers to pull. I didn't come in with an incredibly steep learning curve in food manufacturing, though I still have a ton to learn, especially about the sweet bakery space, where I was involved as a supplier, but not necessarily as a manufacturer like I am now. So I could come in with a game plan on what to do and who in the industry to call and whatnot. But I didn't come in with, okay, here are 10 new customers that are going to double our revenue tomorrow. That didn't happen, but I don't know how many buyers could have come in with that.
Well, now, Will, tell us more about this loss of a key customer. The business goes to market, loses a key customer. The financial footprint, as you said, gets smaller, which is a bit of a euphemism for EBITDA collapses.
Yeah.
And all of the implications of that, some of which are actually quite positive from your perspective. So give us the whole kind of the way you thought through that strategically.
Yeah. So if you look at the long-term revenue history of the business in, call it around 2010 or so, it really started picking up and peaked in about the 2017 time. But all of that major increase was from one big customer or, indirectly supplying this one customer. The one big customer went through some corporate reorganization a handful of years ago and relooked at their supplier base and drastically changed the amount of product they're buying from Bear Stewart. And when this customer was representing, a level of concentration that was so meaningful compared to everybody else, it was really painful for the business. So there was a number of good years in the 2010s, but then by the time I came to see the business, it was at the tail end of that. There's still decent business with this customer, but whereas we were in quite a few different regions, we're now just out of one distribution center. So still some business, but it changed, drastically changed the affordability for me. I would not have been able to buy the business a handful of years ago when it was so concentrated. I don't, even if I could, it's hard to have wanted to with that level of customer concentration unless you know that it's sticky.
Well, and I think that is one of the really interesting points here is that by losing the giant customer before you buy the business, it sure doesn't look good to buy a business whose EBITDA has just dropped dramatically. Mm-hmm. But you're buying the business with the customer concentration problem now solved. You no longer have to worry about that. So in some ways, the fragility of the business has been shaken out before it's your problem. And as you said, the business is, as a consequence of having less EBITDA, now becomes much more within your reach. So it's almost like it becomes, it's a stronger, from your perspective, it's a stronger acquisition.
Yeah, it's a stronger acquisition for me, for the people I'm competing against to buy the business. It doesn't look the same as it looks to me, because if you're a private equity fund and you say, oh, these guys have a great relationship with XYZ, it would look great in our portfolio, where, our other, sister companies don't have that relationship and we can cross sell. Right. So then that goes away. The business is earning less money, but still profitable. But it's, maybe not worth the time of some of these, private equity funds. And then from a strategic perspective, well, maybe also not worth the time, but then is it a fit to sell to a strategic when, the owner has very strong feelings about keeping the business intact for its employee base? And
this XYZ, this customer, you haven't named yet, so I assume you cannot name. If you can't name it. But it's a household name. It's a brand we all know.
Mm-hmm. It's a brand. Yeah, it's a national grocery store chain.
Great. And then the other thing, just the one final kind of bow on this nice package, is you buy a business where there's capacity. There's still all of that capacity at the business. So say more about that.
Yeah. So from a volume standpoint, I know that I could at least double what I'm doing today because the business has shown it in the past. So when bankers say, "Oh, you're going to need a lot of capital investment in the future to grow." No, right? It's already been invested and it's there. So that's another kicker.
And so, but the loss of this big customer and now this excess capacity, does that mean that people were let go? I assume the infrastructure and the machinery or what have you was kept. The CapEx was kept, but did people have to be let go?
Some, but not as many as you would have thought, because they were running a lot of overtime, a lot of working on Saturdays, that kind of stuff, to keep up before. So yes, I've got 30 employees. There were maybe 40 employees before. I don't know exactly off the top of my head, but it wasn't like, it decimated, a ton of jobs. Yes, there were jobs lost because there wasn't as much work, but what I think was more impactful was the people that are still there. They have, their hourly employees getting fewer hours. So, one of my goals is to make sure that these guys are getting as many hours as they want and can handle, because, that's how they earn a living.
Well, as I said, Will, it sure feels like a fat pitch for a guy who'd been working hard to find one, but also being patient. How did it feel getting into the business in February of this year? You closed on January 31st. This was as I said at the top, this was a goal, 10 years in the making. What's the emotional content of finally getting there look like?
Well, it was, I told Cargill in November. I wanted to give them a nice heads up because they were so good to me for so many years. It wasn't sure. It wasn't a sure thing that I was going to close. Right. This is only a few weeks after I signed the LOI. And I gave them, I think I'm going to close by the end of December. So, can my last day be kind of early mid-December? So I left my job in December, and I can't even tell you how much more work it was to get it closed than what I was expecting it to be. And it wasn't for the reasons that you think. Like you go on, you can go on any internet resource and there's plenty of people who have said, okay, here are all the things you need to close an SBA 7(a) loan. Okay, got that. I had my life insurance all, set up in front of time. I'm prepared. What I didn't expect was I did an asset deal, all the crazy hoops I had to jump through with the city of Chicago, and it's not as much the state of Illinois, but trying to get all my licenses and whatnot to actually be able to operate the business on day one. So I'm running around like crazy in the month of January because we didn't close at the end of December. We're targeting closing to January 31st. And the way this company generates financials and the look back period the SBA needs, if we didn't close January 31st, then we were going to be in trouble for a little while, maybe not close for another couple months. So I needed to get my City of Chicago food manufacturing license. Took me 6 trips to City Hall to get, a handful of other things, FDA license, USDA license. Those were significantly easier to get than City of Chicago environmental air permit. Like it was, depending on what jurisdiction you're operating in, it can be, significantly harder or easier to get the licensing done. Mm-hmm. So you ask, I think your question was more like, did I, bake a cake and celebrate? Like I was sprinting, and it wasn't even clear the day before we closed whether we were going to close on the 31st, given these licensing issues.
Is there any takeaway there, Will? I mean, it sounds like you were really trying to be all over your checklists, and yet still you got bitten. Or is it just one of these where estimate how long it'll take and then multiply it times 3 just in case sort of thing?
Yeah, it's just whenever you have to deal with, things that are outside of your control, don't make any assumptions and take anything for granted. I think I was like, okay, I'm submitting this online form to get my business license 6 weeks ahead of when I need to close. That should be enough time. 2 weeks later, when I hadn't heard anything, they're like, oh, yeah, it takes 6 weeks for it to go to zoning and then another 6 weeks for it to go to the business review. And I'm like, what? Like, it doesn't say anything about that on the website, City of Chicago website. Yeah, knowing what I know now about some of these things, I would have been, I was proactive in the places I knew about, but I was also so busy, doing working with the lawyers and the Q of E and all that. So there's just a lot of balls to keep in the air. Would I be more successful in my second acquisition knowing what I know now? Definitely.
Will, I want to also just ask what it feels like to be owner after a guy who was in corporate for 10 years. I want to tie in something that your grandfather told you, that when he reflected back on his career, that was a successful career, but he had a regret. Do you recall? And can you tie that into where I'm going here?
Yeah. Well, just to answer your first question, I am, I went through those years of search purgatory, and I am just so grateful and thankful that it ended up the way that it did. There's nothing written in stone, right? You said this is a fat pitch for me, but I still have to hit it. So there's nothing guaranteed here, and it's, there's challenges every day, but I just feel like it's way more in my control, and in my wheelhouse to know how to react compared to, trying to get lucky finding the right business. So I'm so happy and thankful to be an owner and on this side. And every day I am excited to wake up nice and early and drive down to the plants and get to work and every day compound the improvements that we're making. Getting to the second part of your question. So my grandfather, both my grandfathers were big role models. My grandfather on my father's side, he passed away in December, and which is pretty interesting timing given where my search was wrapping up. But he had, besides the booth experience, getting exposed to ETA, he was all the other big push. So he spent his career in the steel industry. He paid for himself to go to college, working on the steel line in Bethlehem Steel in Pennsylvania. And he spent the rest of his career, 50 years or so working in steel. The last job working for a family held steel manufacturing business where he was the president. And his, regret, if you call it, was, man, I, helped make these people so much money. I would have loved to do that for our family instead of their family. I got compensated well and had a good experience, but it's just, there's no replicating being an owner.
Well, that sounds like it was pretty impactful for you to hear. It's really kind of an influence on the path you've chosen. No?
Definitely. And it was, until he passed, he was an awesome person to bounce things off of and talk about the search with and talk about different businesses. And, even as, in the months before he passed, call him on my way down to meetings with the seller as we were negotiating things. And it was, I miss him now. And the one thing that I have from his estate is his desk. So I brought that to Chicago from Pennsylvania, and I'm sitting at that in my office now, which is pretty special for me.
Oh, that's awesome! What a great piece of family history to carry with you. Where in Chicago is Bear Stewart?
Yeah, for Chicagoans, Bear Stewart is in a couple neighborhoods you'd want to live in. So our main factory is in Wicker Park, which is a bit northwest of downtown, and then our smaller location is in Bucktown, which is about a mile north of our Wicker Park location.
Those are great neighborhoods. Those are kind of on the short list of the cool Chicago neighborhoods.
Yeah, there's a lot of good restaurants to eat at. That's for sure. In terms of pulling up 18-wheelers in front of your plant while people are riding their bikes down the street and walking their dogs, I don't know if the neighbors love us. I got an email last week from a neighbor saying, our cooling unit on top of the building is making way too much noise while they're trying to sleep. What can we do about it? So there's positives and negatives for being in such a great neighborhood.
Yeah. Well, Will, before I let you go, I want to ask you one more question about manufacturing as an industry to buy into. I've had a handful of guests who have bought manufacturing businesses, many of them, though, more fabrication businesses than taking raw materials, like I think you said you are at Bear Stewart, and processing them into some then second order product. You've given me the impression that there is, you've got 10 years of specialization here. And you said modestly that, it's not like you're God's gift to baked ingredients manufacturing, so that you still feel like there's a lot to learn. So is this a business that any searcher could have acquired, or is this specialized enough that you feel like something like this would really need somebody who already has experience, or at least quite close adjacent experience, to be successful with?
Yeah, I think there's a learning curve for acquiring any business. I think you set yourself up for more success if you have some basis in what's going on before you get there. It's been invaluable for me to have industry relationships, invaluable for me to know what's important in the business and what really drives profitability. I remember someone asked me, I don't know, just a couple of years ago in the middle of my search, tell me something about the food industry that I wouldn't know, as a potential acquirer in the industry. And my answer was, just how important food safety is, and having an idea for how to run a plant in a food safe way. It's obvious, right? You need to make safe food, and there's laws around it, but there's a whole lot under the surface on what you need to be doing, and a lot of different programs you need to be running. So that's just one example of where it helps to have exposure and experience. So could I have been successful 10 years ago before my Cargill experience buying this business and running it? I don't know. I would have been way more stressed than I am right now. And I'm already, pretty stressed trying to run this thing. So it's like, what do you want to get yourself into? And it just increases your risk profile if you're coming in fresh.
Okay, Will Gano. Well, thank you for sharing this story with us. A neat business, but I dare say a neater story. 10 years, as we keep saying, 10 years in the making. In fact, I found you because you posted an enthusiastic announcement, if you will, or just encouraging message on Search Funder on the day, I believe, the day that you were driving to your new business for the first time, encouraging everyone, hey, this has been some years that I've been at this, but I got here and I'm driving to work at my new business as we speak. So don't be discouraged and push through as I have. So it was such an uplifting message, and one that people in search need to hear, because it can be so disillusioning at times and take such a long time and be expensive and all the rest of it. So how can people contact you, Will, if they have questions or need encouragement because they're 7 years into their search?
Yeah, I think the best way is to connect with me over LinkedIn, and then we can take the conversation from there. And yeah, just to echo what you said and what I had said, it is tough. And if it was easy, everybody would be doing it, because the fruits at the end of it are so worthwhile. So if your heart's in it, stick with it. And there's no shame in it taking a while or being more frustrating than what you expected it to be. You have to expect it to be frustrating at the outset, or else you probably won't survive it.
Will Gano, thank you very much for coming on. It's been a pleasure.
Well, thanks. Always great talking to you. Thanks for the time.
I hope you enjoyed that interview. Make sure you subscribe to the Acquiring Minds channel below. We are now publishing twice a week, so tons of new interviews and stories to come. Stories that will help you along your own path to acquiring a business.